The mess hall at Coronado Naval Base was always noisy around noon. Forks clattered against metal trays, boots thudded against linoleum floors, and laughter bounced off the walls like ricocheting bullets. The air smelled of reheated pasta and coffee that had been brewed too long ago. For most recruits, lunch was the only hour where the pressure of training eased. A chance to brag, to joke, to pretend the Navy wasn't grinding them to dust. At one corner table, however, silence stood out. A woman sat alone, posture perfect, shoulders squared, eating with precise movements that spoke of discipline, not leisure. She didn't check her phone, didn't talk, didn't even look around. Her short dark hair was neatly tied back, and her uniform, though plain, looked sharper than anyone else's. The name patch on her chest simply read Harper. No rank, no last name. Just that. Several of the young recruits noticed her the moment she walked in. It wasn't common to see women around that section of the base, not in the recruits' mess hall. And it was even rarer to see one so composed, so quietly self-assured. Her stillness didn't invite attention. It demanded it. Carter, a tall recruit with a confident smirk, was the first to comment. "Who's the Ice Queen?" he muttered, nudging his friend Briggs. Briggs snorted. "Probably admin or a visiting psychologist or something. Look at her, sitting all alone like she's better than everyone." Lopez, the joker of the group, leaned back in his chair. "Maybe she's lost," he said, grinning. "She looks like she belongs in an office, not a base cafeteria." The five of them, Carter, Briggs, Lopez, Nolan, and Duffy, had formed their own little circle of ego and camaraderie over the past 2 weeks. They weren't the worst recruits in the batch, but they had the bad habit of underestimating others and overestimating themselves. To them, Harper looked like easy prey, an outsider who didn't fit the mold. She ate slowly, occasionally sipping from a cup of coffee. The way she held it, steady, deliberate, made Carter frown. She wasn't nervous. Most new faces on base looked overwhelmed, glancing around or trying to blend in. Harper didn't blend in. She didn't even try. She looked like someone who already knew her place and didn't need anyone's permission to sit there. "You think she's an officer?" Nolan asked. Duffy laughed. "An officer wouldn't be here with us. Besides, she doesn't have insignia. Probably admin, like Briggs said. Maybe doing paperwork for the training division. Or undercover inspection," Lopez added with mock seriousness. "Checking which one of us doesn't finish his broccoli." That got a round of laughter from the table. But Harper didn't even glance in their direction. She kept eating, measured, quiet, unbothered. That alone irritated Briggs. "What's her deal, man?" he said finally. "Sitting there like she's meditating in a war zone." Carter shrugged, but his smirk lingered. "Let's find out." The words were simple, but they carried the kind of careless confidence that came from being 20 and half-trained. Around them, other recruits were too busy eating to notice, but a few eyes followed as Carter and his crew started whispering plans, like a pack of bored teenagers about to play a prank. Harper felt their gaze, though she never looked up. She could sense it, the immaturity, the arrogance, the way young men often confused loudness with power. She'd seen that look in every platoon she'd ever led. Even in combat zones, it was the same. Inexperienced men, testing boundaries they didn't yet understand. She took another sip of her coffee. The mug was warm in her hands. Her heartbeat remained steady, her breathing slow. Around her, time seemed to move differently. She wasn't supposed to interfere, not yet. Her task was simple: observe. Commander Reeves had asked her to assess leadership conduct among the recruits before the next evaluation phase. Most didn't know she was there, only the senior staff. And that was exactly how she preferred it. But she also knew this look, the one Carter had given her before standing. It was the look that always came before a bad decision. Across the room, Carter straightened, pushing his chair back. "Let's go say hi," he said, flashing a grin. Lopez chuckled. "Oh, this'll be good." Briggs grabbed his drink and followed. The five of them moved like they owned the floor, laughing under their breath, trying to mask the insecurity that always follows a challenge they don't yet understand. As they approached, the noise in the hall seemed to dim. A few recruits turned to watch. It wasn't every day you saw a group of cocky men walking toward a solitary woman with that kind of swagger. Everyone sensed tension, even if they didn't know what kind. Harper didn't move. Her fork paused for a moment above her tray, just a second, then continued. She was listening now, not eating. When the first shadow fell over her table, she looked up slowly. Her eyes were gray, calm, analytical, and cold enough to stop someone mid-sentence. "Mind if we join you?" Carter asked, pulling out the chair across from her without waiting for permission. Harper's gaze flicked from his hand to his face, then back to her meal. She didn't answer. "Guess that's a yes," Lopez said, chuckling. He leaned on the table, deliberately invading her space. "You don't talk much, huh? What are you, the strong, silent type?" Briggs added with a smirk. "Maybe she's shy. We should make her feel welcome." A few laughs rippled from nearby tables. The recruits had a small audience now. Harper placed her fork down carefully, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and looked up again, not angry, not scared, just still. "You might want to move your hand," she said quietly. The words were soft, but they cut through the air like a command. Duffy, who had just set his cup on her tray, froze for half a second, confused more than threatened. "Excuse me?" he said with a smirk. Harper didn't blink. "I said move your hand." Something about her tone wasn't playful. It wasn't even confrontational. It was absolute. But Carter laughed, brushing it off. "Relax, we're just—" Before he could finish, Harper's eyes flicked toward the clock on the wall. She exhaled slowly, as though making a decision. Then she stood. And in that moment, the air changed. Every movement was precise, controlled, the kind of movement that came from years of muscle memory, not instinct. She didn't tower over them, but her presence made her seem taller than all of them combined. She wasn't looking for a fight. She was giving them one last chance to back down. "You don't want to do this," she said calmly, eyes locked on Carter's. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried authority, the kind that came from command, from someone who'd led people through fire and returned alive. But Carter didn't understand. None of them did. They laughed again, pretending to be unbothered, pretending this wasn't the moment before a storm. Harper's expression didn't change. She looked past them for a second, at the mirrored steel doors of the kitchen, where she could see Commander Reeves watching from a distance. He gave the faintest nod. That was all she needed. She turned back to the recruits, her face unreadable. "All right then," she said softly. And that was the last calm second before 30 seconds that would become base legend. The 5 recruits lingered by Harper's table, half smirking, half cautious. They had approached her with bravado, convinced that a quiet woman alone was an invitation to test their strength, wit, and if possible, their humor. Carter, ever the self-appointed leader of their little group, was the first to break the silence, leaning casually against the table as though he owned the space. "You must be new here," he said, voice pitched a little too high, laughter hiding nerves he refused to acknowledge. "I don't think I've seen you around." Harper looked up from her tray, eyes level with his, her gaze steady but unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just met his stare with the kind of quiet precision that made even the loudest men reconsider their next words. "I've been here," she replied calmly. Observing, observing? Briggs snorted, stepping closer, his grin widening. Observing what? How to make a proper sandwich. Her fork paused in midair. She didn't respond immediately, giving him a moment to realize, too late, that she wasn't joking. Her tone wasn't threatening, yet it carried weight. It carried experience. It carried something deeper than mere rank or authority. Lopez, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. Come on, she's probably one of those pencil-pushing types. All paperwork and no action. He laughed, nudging Duffy. Watch this. She's going to flip her pen at us. The recruits exchanged whispered jokes, feeding off each other's nervous bravado. But Harper didn't react. She ate another bite of her food, slow and deliberate, her silence magnifying their discomfort. For a moment, the mess hall seemed to quiet around her. Even the clatter of trays sounded distant, muffled. Carter, growing frustrated with the lack of acknowledgement, leaned closer. Well, aren't you going to say something? He gestured at her food. I mean, if you're going to sit here, you could at least talk. Harper looked at him, her expression neutral. I said I'm observing, she repeated, her voice calm and unwavering. And you're providing plenty of material. The 5 men froze, just for a fraction of a second. It wasn't the words that shocked them. It was the delivery. Calm, precise, unshaken. Her voice didn't shout. It didn't plead. It simply existed, and it carried authority that they instinctively felt but didn't understand. Briggs laughed nervously, trying to mask his discomfort. You think you're some kind of, what? Drill instructor? Harper's gaze shifted from Briggs to Carter. I'm someone who understands what happens when people overestimate themselves. Nolan smirked. Overestimate themselves? Buddy, she's just talking. She's soft, probably doesn't even lift weights. Soft? Carter repeated, eyebrows raised. I like that. Let's see how soft she is, huh? There was a momentary pause as the 5 men exchanged glances, each one trying to gauge whether the others were genuinely brave or just bluffing. They were all thinking the same thing. We faced physical training, mud, long runs, and obstacle courses. We're prepared. How hard can one woman be? Harper's eyes narrowed slightly. Not in anger. There wasn't anger in her expression, but in recognition. She had seen this arrogance countless times. Young men confident in their strength, unaware of their own inexperience, about to misjudge someone who had survived more than they could imagine. You're going to test me, she said softly, leaning back just slightly. And that's fine. But remember this. Underestimating your opponent is the fastest way to get yourself hurt. Her words didn't faze them. In fact, they seemed to excite them. A challenge. Something to prove themselves. That's all it was to them. Another opportunity to demonstrate courage in front of their peers. All right, team, Carter whispered to the others. We show her who's boss. Keep it light, keep it funny. Don't make it personal. They laughed quietly, approaching her with a casual swagger that belied their growing anticipation. Duffy, attempting to lead the charge, reached out toward her tray. You know, you could share some of that food. Harper's hand moved without hesitation. She placed her cup firmly in front of her, holding it there as a subtle but unmistakable boundary. Do not touch that. Carter laughed, shaking his head. Oh, come on. We're just joking. She stood slowly, deliberately. Not fast, not aggressive, but with a calm precision that immediately demanded space around her. The 5 recruits instinctively took a step back. You've been joking, she said quietly, and I've let it go. But this stops now. Move your hand. Step back. Or you'll regret it. The mess hall seemed to pause. Other recruits turned their heads. Conversations died. Someone dropped the tray. Everyone felt the tension spike like an electric charge. The 5 men, still standing confidently, didn't fully grasp what they were seeing. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't shouting. And yet, she was commanding absolute attention. Briggs laughed nervously, trying to regain control. All right. No need to. Harper's eyes flicked to him, then Carter, and Lopez, then Nolan. And finally Duffy. She was assessing them all in one sweep, reading posture, measuring weight distribution, noticing minor shifts in balance. Every recruit had a subtle tells, slight hesitations, tightened fists, the way they were breathing. Within seconds, she had mentally mapped exactly how each one might react. "You'll get one chance to step back," she said softly. "I won't warn you again." Carter's grin faltered. He could see it now, the difference between talking to a recruit and talking to someone who had walked through more than words could describe. Something in her composure, in the precise control of her body, made even him hesitate. But pride and ego were stubborn. He couldn't back down yet. 30 seconds, and they'll understand, Harper thought silently. And indeed, 30 seconds would be all it took. The mess hall, normally chaotic, had become a stage. Even the cooks behind the serving line stopped to watch. The other recruits, sensing that this wasn't an ordinary confrontation, held their breath. Everyone instinctively knew the quiet woman sitting alone wasn't ordinary. Briggs stepped closer, testing her boundary again. "You're serious? About this?" Harper's expression didn't change. Her voice didn't rise. "Try me." And at that moment, the 5 recruits, fueled by bravado and ignorance, made their first mistake. They assumed she was weak. That was their last mistake. Because Harper Lane wasn't just anyone. She was a Navy SEAL, a leader, a veteran, someone who had faced life-and-death situations in the world's most unforgiving environments. And she had a calm, deadly patience that came from knowing exactly how to handle moments like this. The first subtle movement from her, a shift in stance, a glance that conveyed impossible speed, caused all 5 men to instinctively tighten their fists, unprepared for the precision they were about to face. In under a minute, the quiet observation would transform into a storm of realization. The whispers had ended. The laughter had died. The moment of reckoning was near, and Harper Lane remained calm, deliberate, and deadly still. The 5 recruits circled Harper's table like predators confident in their prey. The mess hall's usual chatter seemed distant now, replaced by the low hum of anticipation. Other recruits glanced their way, some smirking, some uneasy. The scene was magnetic. A quiet woman, a table of cocky young men, and the invisible tension crackling between them. Carter leaned forward first, a mockery in his tone. "So, you gonna eat that all by yourself, or are you going to share some wisdom with us?" Harper looked up, meeting his gaze evenly. Her eyes were gray, sharp, and unflinching. "I'm not here to share anything. Sit down or step back." The men exchanged incredulous looks. Carter laughed, brushing his hand over the edge of the table, testing her patience. "Step back? You're funny. Who taught you to talk like that?" "You'll find out soon enough," she replied, calm as if discussing the weather. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of her tray, a subtle yet unmistakable signal. This was her space. Duffy leaned in, smirking, trying to appear casual. "Relax, we're just having fun. Don't be so uptight." Harper's eyes didn't waver. Fun ends when boundaries are crossed. "Move your hand." The first hesitation flickered across Carter's face. The smirk remained, but for a moment, pride clashed with instinct. He hadn't been laughed at like this since the first week of training. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. Briggs, sensing his leader's pause, pushed forward, trying to regain control. "Oh, come on. We're not hurting you. You're overreacting. Harper's movements were deliberate. She slowly rose from her chair, and the 5 men stiffened simultaneously. Every muscle in her body radiated control and awareness. The air seemed to tighten. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't gesturing wildly. She simply stood, the smallest action carrying the weight of authority and lethal experience. "You've made a mistake," she said softly, voice flat but cutting. "And soon you'll regret it." A pause. Then Carter leaned slightly, unaware of the danger. "Ha! You think we're scared of a woman sitting at a table?" Her eyes flicked to each of them in turn, scanning posture, weight, balance, and even subtle micro-expressions. 30 seconds. That was all it would take. 30 seconds to make them understand that misjudging her was their last mistake. Briggs tried to laugh, trying to ease the tension. "Relax, we're all friends here, right? Don't get testy." Harper's gaze shifted, and the temperature seemed to drop. Not physically, but every recruit felt a chill. She didn't move yet, but her presence alone commanded attention. She wasn't just a woman, and she wasn't just an officer. She was someone who had faced danger far greater than their youthful arrogance could comprehend. Carter leaned forward again, attempting to grab her cup as a joke. "Come on, it's just coffee." That was the moment Harper acted. Her movements were instantaneous, but controlled, precise like a well-rehearsed drill. She intercepted his hand with a simple shift of her arm, redirecting him harmlessly to the side. Briggs lunged, trying to push her off balance, but Harper pivoted, using his momentum to guide him gently but firmly to the floor. Nolan tried to step around her, thinking speed would give him advantage, but Harper anticipated every step, closing gaps, redirecting him with small but calculated motions. The mess hall froze. Utensils clattered to the floor. A tray toppled. A few recruits gasped audibly. Silence followed, not just from shock, but from realization. Duffy, who had been leaning casually, suddenly found himself pinned against the wall, with Harper's arm pressing lightly against his chest. Lopez tried to back away, but Harper moved like liquid, positioning herself strategically so that escape was impossible without risk. All 5 men were now either on the floor, leaning against walls, or otherwise immobilized. And Harper? She remained calm, barely breathing harder than normal. Her face betrayed nothing, no anger, no triumph, just the quiet authority of someone in complete control. "You're done showing off," she said softly, each word deliberate. The tone wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It was final. Carter lay on the floor, staring at her in disbelief. He had trained for physical dominance, thought he understood strength, thought he could intimidate anyone. He had been wrong. Every ounce of bravado drained from him. The other 4 looked equally stunned, their confidence shattered in 30 seconds of precision, awareness, and discipline they had not anticipated. A few recruits in nearby tables began to whisper. Is she? "A SEAL?" one murmured. "No way," said another. Harper adjusted her cap, looking down at them with a calm expression. "You will not test someone whose skill you cannot measure. Understand?" Briggs, shaking his head, finally muttered, "Who? Who are you?" At that moment, the door to the mess hall opened, and Commander Reeves stepped in. His presence immediately commanded attention. "Well done, Commander Lane," he said, voice firm but not loud. The recruits froze. "Commander Lane?" They blinked, disbelief replacing shock. Harper Lane was no ordinary woman. She was not here for a casual inspection, not here for idle observation. She was a Navy SEAL, a decorated officer, a veteran of multiple combat deployments. The realization hit like a wave of ice. Every action, every stance, every subtle movement she had made was now clear. The 5 men had just been thoroughly dismantled. not out of anger, not out of vengeance, but from calm, trained authority. Harper's gaze swept over the mess hall one final time. "Consider this a lesson," she said quietly. The words were soft, but each recruit understood them perfectly. This wasn't humiliation for its own sake. This was education. A warning. A demonstration of respect and boundaries. The room remained still. The 5 men scrambled to their feet, faces red, pride bruised beyond repair. Carter's smirk had vanished entirely. Briggs looked as if he might faint. Nolan, Duffy, and Lopez simply stared, trying to process the unthinkable, that someone so composed, so quiet, and so unassuming could wield skill and authority beyond anything they had imagined. Commander Reeves stepped closer to Harper, nodding slightly. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander." Observation complete. The recruits now fully understood. Harper Lane was no stranger. She was a Navy SEAL, one of the few women who had completed BUDS, and a decorated combat veteran. The 5 men had just tested someone whose experience dwarfed theirs in every measurable way. And they had failed spectacularly. Harper returned to her tray, calm once more, as though nothing had happened. The silence lingered. No one dared speak, not even a word of ridicule or excuse. The room slowly resumed its rhythm, but the story had already taken root. A tale of quiet strength, precise authority, and an unforgettable 30 seconds. In the back of their minds, the 5 men realized something crucial. Confidence without understanding was dangerous. Arrogance without awareness could be humiliating. And underestimating anyone, could be the fastest way to be outclassed, outmaneuvered, and utterly corrected. Harper Lane sat back down, picked up her fork, and resumed eating. Her face remained calm, almost serene. But in those 30 seconds, she had taught lessons no words could capture, no lecture could convey. Respect had been earned, and it was irreversible. And from that day forward, the mess hall and the Coronado Naval Base would whisper the story of the quiet woman who needed only 30 seconds to remind everyone of what real strength looked like. The mess hall was silent. The usual din of trays, boots, and chatter had vanished as if the room itself had been paused. Every eye was fixed on the 5 recruits sprawled across the floor or pinned awkwardly against walls, and on Harper Lane, standing perfectly calm, her posture unshaken, her expression unreadable. 30 seconds had passed, 30 seconds that had unraveled years of assumed superiority in mere moments. Carter, face red and chest heaving, slowly processed what had just happened. His mind tried to rationalize it, to blame some fluke or exaggerate the story in his own head. But nothing could disguise the truth. They had all been outclassed, outmaneuvered, and embarrassed by a woman sitting alone at a table whose quiet composure had masked lethal skill. Briggs groaned, pushing himself up with trembling arms. How did she do that? His voice cracked, disbelief overriding pride. I can't. Lopez sat on the floor, legs crossed, staring at Harper with wide eyes. No way, he muttered repeatedly. Nolan and Duffy were similarly stunned, the color draining from their faces. They were used to physical drills, team competitions, and even the occasional mock fights. They had thought themselves prepared. But this wasn't a drill. This was a controlled storm, precise and merciless in its execution, yet delivered without aggression or anger. Harper's voice cut through the tension, soft yet firm. This isn't about strength or size, she said, sitting back down at her table as if nothing had occurred. It's about control, awareness, respect. The recruits blinked, trying to process her words while simultaneously recalling every movement, every calculated step she had taken. Carter's hands clenched into fists, partly from frustration, partly from a dawning understanding. You "You're a seal," he said finally, almost as if saying it aloud might make it less real. Harper's eyes met his. "Yes, and I'm here to observe leadership, not to humiliate. But you've already failed your first lesson. Never underestimate someone based on appearances." The room seemed to exhale collectively. Some recruits, who had been quietly eating at neighboring tables, looked both awed and terrified. A few whispered to each other, "That was insane. She didn't even look like she could fight." Commander Reeves entered quietly, his presence commanding yet calm. He surveyed the aftermath, noting the sprawled recruits and the perfectly composed Harper. "Lieutenant Commander Lane," he said with a faint nod. "Observation complete?" "Complete, sir," Harper replied evenly. "They've provided sufficient material on overconfidence and lack of situational awareness." The 5 recruits had finally realized the depth of their mistake. They had been cocky, immature, and reckless. And now they were forced to confront the reality of their arrogance. For Carter, the humiliation cut the deepest. He had prided himself on being the alpha, the confident leader of their little pack. And in 30 seconds, that illusion had been stripped away. "Do we get a redo?" Briggs asked weakly, voice trembling between embarrassment and hope. Harper didn't smile. She simply shook her head. Life doesn't offer redos. Lessons are either learned or repeated until the consequences grow more severe. The recruits hung their heads. Duffy whispered, barely audible, "She?" She didn't even raise her voice. "That's the point," Harper said softly. "Real strength doesn't announce itself. It moves silently, and it acts decisively. You won't always know who's capable until it's too late." Carter's face flushed, a mixture of shame and grudging respect settling over him. He wanted to argue, to reclaim some shred of ego, but no words came. Every muscle in his body still tensed from the unexpected disarming, redirecting, and control that Harper had displayed. He realized, bitterly, that he had been naive. The mess hall gradually returned to normalcy, though whispers persisted. Some recruits avoided eye contact with Harper. Others simply stared, replaying every second of the encounter. Even the cooks behind the serving line paused for a moment, unsure whether to continue their work or just watch the legend unfold. Harper returned to her meal, slowly taking a bite, her expression calm. It was almost surreal, the quiet woman eating lunch as if nothing had occurred, while 5 men struggled to regain composure and pride. Commander Reeves approached the 5 recruits, his voice measured and authoritative. "Men, let this be a lesson in humility. You were reckless. You challenged someone whose experience dwarfs your own. And yet there is an opportunity here." "What opportunity?" Carter asked, voice still tight with embarrassment. "To learn. To improve. To recognize that confidence without awareness is dangerous. Lieutenant Commander Lane will oversee your next exercises. Consider it part of your leadership development." The recruits exchanged nervous glances. The word exercises sounded harmless, but given what they had just witnessed, it carried an unspoken weight. They knew the drills would be different, far more intense, precise, and exhausting. Harper looked at them directly, her gray eyes locking on to each one in turn. "I don't need to teach you to fight. I need to teach you to understand yourself and those around you. Leadership isn't about intimidation or bravado. It's about awareness, control, and respect." Lopez muttered under his breath, "Yeah. Respect." His voice carried disbelief, admiration, and lingering fear all at once. Briggs straightened, trying to regain composure. "I get it now. We messed up." "Good," Harper said softly. "Admitting mistakes is the first step toward improvement. Now remember this moment. Remember how quickly assumptions can be proven wrong. And remember that strength isn't measured by size, loudness, or arrogance. The 5 men nodded, silently absorbing the lesson. Pride had been bruised, ego deflated, and reality had struck hard. The humiliation lingered, but it was now paired with insight. They would not forget this day. Other recruits, who had watched quietly, whispered among themselves. "She's a SEAL. Did you see that?" one said. "She didn't even sweat," another replied. The truth settled over the room like a heavy weight. Harper Lane's presence, her calm authority, and her skill had transformed an ordinary lunch into a living lesson in humility, respect, and situational awareness. 30 seconds. That's all it had taken to leave an indelible mark. Carter, finally regaining some control over his shaking hands, looked at Harper with a mixture of respect and fear. You're incredible," he said quietly. Harper's expression softened slightly. Not a smile, but an acknowledgement. "I do my job. Now, do yours. Learn, grow. Don't repeat this mistake." The recruits bowed their heads in silent agreement, understanding that their behavior had consequences far greater than they had imagined. And in the back of their minds, each silently vowed never to misjudge another person based on appearances alone. Not ever. As the mess hall returned to its normal rhythm, Harper Lane finished her meal with the same calm precision as when she had arrived. The 5 men lingered, absorbing the reality that had struck them. The lesson was clear. Arrogance could be dangerous. Underestimating someone could be fatal to pride. And true strength was measured by control, not noise. 30 seconds had changed everything. The mess hall remained hushed in the aftermath of the 30-second showdown. Even the clatter of trays and the usual chatter of lunch seemed distant now, as if everyone present had collectively acknowledged that something extraordinary had just occurred. The 5 recruits, Carter, Riggs, Lopez, Nolan, and Duffy, sat or stood with frozen expressions. Their pride shattered, their egos bruised, and their minds struggling to comprehend what they had witnessed. Carter finally dared to lift his head, eyes wide and incredulous. She wasn't joking. None of it was a drill. Briggs shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. "No, that was real." Nolan muttered, almost under his breath. "I've been through every training exercise this week. Nothing moves like that." Harper Lane, seated calmly at her tray once more, didn't respond immediately. She took a deliberate sip of her coffee, measuring the silence, observing the recruits with the same sharp precision that had allowed her to dismantle them in 30 seconds. The door at the far end of the mess hall opened quietly, and Commander Reeves entered. His boots clicked softly against the linoleum, but his presence carried weight far beyond the sound. Every recruit instinctively straightened, some out of respect, others out of fear. Harper's gaze shifted slightly, acknowledging his presence without a word. "Lieutenant Commander Lane," he said, his voice calm, yet authoritative. "Observation complete?" Harper nodded once, her expression neutral. "Yes, sir." The recruits have provided ample material on overconfidence, misjudgment, and lack of situational awareness. Carter's mouth went dry. "Lieutenant Commander?" he repeated, disbelief etched into every syllable. You're a SEAL?" Harper's gaze swept over the 5 recruits. "Yes," she said simply, as if the statement were a matter of fact rather than a revelation. "I am a Navy SEAL and a Lieutenant Commander. I've completed BOD's multiple deployments and have been decorated for service." The recruits' faces drained of color. The room spun slightly in Carter's mind. Every casual movement, every calm word, every deliberate step Harper had taken in those 30 seconds now made terrifying sense. She hadn't just been skilled. She had been lethal, precise, and trained. Lopez finally found his voice, trembling. "Wait You. All this time, you. You're serious? Harper nodded again, taking a measured bite of her food. I am always serious when it comes to discipline, awareness, and leadership. Duffy leaned back, disbelief and awe pouring across his face. We just tried to mess with you. You tested someone whose experience far exceeds yours, Harper said evenly. And you failed. Her voice carried no malice, only the quiet weight of truth. You mistook calm for weakness, silence for ignorance. That is your first and most critical mistake as leaders in training. Carter clenched his fists, frustration and humility colliding. He had spent weeks thinking himself competent, confident, untouchable. And now he realized just how naive he had been. Every step he had taken, every boast, every smug glance, it had all been meaningless against someone who had walked through the fires of combat and returned unscathed. Commander Reeves stepped closer, addressing the room. Gentlemen, you have just witnessed a lesson few get in basic training. Lieutenant Commander Lane is not here to humiliate you. She is here to evaluate your judgment, your respect for others, and your leadership potential. And you have failed your first test. Briggs groaned audibly. Failed? That wasn't even a fair fight. Reeves' gaze was steady. It wasn't about fairness. It was about awareness. Leadership is not measured by brute force or arrogance. It is measured by understanding the people around you, respecting their abilities, and recognizing when to act and when to listen. Carter's voice shook slightly as he spoke. We didn't know. We had no idea who you were. Harper's eyes softened marginally, acknowledging his admission without pity. That is precisely the point. You cannot rely on assumptions. You cannot judge based on appearances, age, or gender. A true leader evaluates and observes before acting. And right now, you have observed enough to know your errors. Lopez swallowed hard. So, you weren't even supposed to fight us? Harper shook her head. Not exactly. I was here to watch how you handled someone outside your immediate group. But you forced the situation. Your arrogance made you reckless. And in 30 seconds, you learned the consequences. Nolan's lips pressed into a thin line. 30 seconds. That's all it took? Yes, Harper replied. 30 seconds is often all it takes in real life. 30 seconds can save your life or ruin it. Timing, precision, awareness, and composure are everything. You were sloppy. You misjudged me. And you will remember this moment. The other recruits nodded silently, the weight of their humbling sinking in. It was not merely a physical lesson. It was a psychological one. They had been arrogant, immature, and unthinking. Harper Lane had shown them, in 30 seconds, the stark reality of experience and skill. Commander Reeves addressed the 5 recruits directly. Lieutenant Commander Lane has demonstrated what leadership, control, and awareness look like. Take note, reflect, learn, and understand that failure is not shameful if it teaches you to grow. You will have an opportunity to redeem yourselves, but only if you internalize the lesson she has provided. Carter's mind raced, replaying every movement, every decision he had made in those 30 seconds. His pride had been shattered, but he realized the lesson extended far beyond humiliation. Harper Lane wasn't just a fighter. She was a teacher, a mentor, and a living example of what true strength and discipline looked like. Briggs finally muttered, almost inaudibly, We underestimated her. You did, Harper said softly. And that is often the first mistake young leaders make. Underestimating others blinds you to reality. It is humility and awareness that create effective leadership, not arrogance. Duffy, still breathing heavily, nodded. We won't forget this. You will remember it, Harper said. And you will use that memory to become better, not bitter. Lopez glanced around at his comrades. We've got a lot to learn. Indeed, Harper said calmly. And I will help you, but only if you are willing to listen. Respect must be earned, but mistakes are also your teacher. The 5 recruits collectively nodded, their heads bowed in acknowledgement. Their laughter, arrogance, and bravado had been stripped away. In its place stood humility, understanding, and a deep awareness that leadership required far more than ego or bravado. Commander Reeves looked at Harper with quiet approval. Lesson delivered. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander Lane. You may continue your observation elsewhere. Harper nodded once, finishing her meal with composure. She hadn't sought recognition, praise, or applause. She had simply demonstrated reality, skill, discipline, and authority. And in doing so, she had left an indelible mark on 5 recruits who would never forget the lesson of 30 seconds. As she left the mess hall, the story began to spread. Whispers followed her, the quiet woman who took down 5 men in 30 seconds. A Navy SEAL, Lieutenant Commander Lane. The legend had begun. Carter and the others sat in stunned silence, each processing their embarrassment, awe, and the profound lesson they had just witnessed. The revelation of Harper Lane's identity transformed the entire scenario. It was no longer a simple mess hall confrontation. It was a lesson in leadership, humility, and the reality of underestimating someone based solely on appearance or gender. For the 5 recruits, the day had begun with arrogance and ended with clarity. They had been forced to confront their own limitations, their own assumptions, and the truth that leadership and strength often came in quiet, controlled, and unassuming forms. And Harper Lane? She had already moved on, calm and composed, leaving behind a room full of young men forever changed, and a story that would echo through the base for years to come. The mess hall had returned to its normal rhythm, but the tension lingered in the minds of Carter, Briggs, Lopez, Nolan, and Duffy. Their egos had been bruised, their pride shattered, and their understanding of reality expanded in a way none of them had anticipated. Harper Lane didn't linger. She moved with quiet purpose, heading to the training courtyard where she had scheduled follow-ups with recruits. The 5 men hesitated for a moment before following, unsure whether they had been invited or expected to trail behind her in humility. Every step they took felt heavy, not from fatigue, but from the awareness of how completely they had misjudged someone. When they reached the courtyard, Harper stood with her back straight, surveying the area. The sun glinted off her dark uniform, accentuating the discipline in every line of her posture. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone commanded attention. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, turning to face them. What happened in the mess hall was not a display of aggression. It was a demonstration of respect, awareness, and discipline. You need to understand the difference. Carter swallowed, the words weighing on him. Respect for what? He asked hesitantly. Harper's gaze swept over all 5 of them. Respect for skill, for experience, for others' boundaries, and most importantly, for yourself. Leadership is earned through awareness, not by overpowering others or proving your ego. Briggs looked incredulous. So, you're saying we should have? What? Backed off? Exactly, Harper replied, calm but unwavering. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. You observed, assessed, and acted without considering the consequences. That is the essence of reckless leadership. You cannot underestimate anyone, and you cannot assume control without first understanding your environment. Lopez muttered, That seems like a lot to remember in the middle of a fight. Harper smiled faintly, the smallest hint of humor touching her expression. It is, but situational awareness is a habit, not an instinct. It must be practiced, refined, and internalized. Every action, every movement, every decision must be considered before it is executed. Only then can you lead effectively and safely. Nolan shifted uncomfortably. So, you're not just talking about physical strength? No, Harper said firmly. Physical strength is secondary. What matters is mental strength, control, observation, and adaptability. These are the qualities that determine who survives, who leads, and who succeeds. A person with skill but without awareness is a liability. A person with awareness and composure is a leader. Duffy, still shaken from the earlier confrontation, asked softly, "So, the mess hall, that was a lesson?" "Precisely," Harper replied. "It wasn't about proving dominance. It was about demonstrating that assumptions are dangerous, arrogance is costly, and respect is earned, never demanded. You will carry that lesson forward into every exercise, every challenge, and every interaction from this day on." Carter exhaled slowly, finally letting humility replace frustration. I get it now. We misjudged you?" Harper's gray eyes met his, unblinking. "Yes, and you misjudged yourselves. Confidence without understanding is dangerous. It leads to mistakes, sometimes costly ones. Leadership requires more than pride. It requires awareness, respect, and patience." The 5 recruits exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the weight of her words. None of them had ever experienced a lesson delivered with such precision, control, and authority. This was not a lecture, not a scolding. It was a living demonstration, a blueprint for behavior and leadership. Harper gestured to the open courtyard. "We will start with exercises in observation and situational awareness. Not physical combat, not competition. Observation. You will learn to read body language, anticipate movements, and understand the environment around you. These skills will save lives, including your own." Briggs groaned quietly. "Observation drills. Sounds boring. Boring to some," Harper said evenly, "but invaluable to those who want to survive and lead. You will learn patience, awareness, and respect for your peers, your environment, and yourself. That is far more important than showing off strength." Carter, still processing the earlier humiliation, nodded slowly. We'll do it. We'll follow your instructions." Harper's lips curved slightly into the smallest acknowledgement. "Good. Listen carefully and observe. The first step in leadership is awareness. The second step is respect. The third is action, calculated, measured, and deliberate. Fail any of these, and consequences follow." She walked slowly across the courtyard, demonstrating subtle movements, scanning the horizon, noting small shifts in posture, and identifying potential hazards in the environment. Every step was deliberate, every glance calculated. The recruits followed, trying to match her precision, attempting to internalize the lesson that had cost them so much pride earlier. Harper stopped, turning to face them again. "Notice everything. The tilt of a head, the clench of a fist, the placement of feet. Every detail matters. Leadership is often silent. It is observation, analysis, and decisive action, all performed without unnecessary noise or ego. Today, you begin learning that." Lopez muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "I never thought lunch could teach so much." "That is the point," Harper said calmly. "Lessons are often disguised in the most mundane situations. You just need to be aware enough to recognize them. Respect is not taught through intimidation. It is earned through consistent awareness, discipline, and composure." Nolan, taking a deep breath, asked, "So, if we keep learning, we can get better?" "Yes," Harper replied. "You will get better. But only if you internalize these lessons, and only if you let humility guide your actions. Strength is temporary, awareness and discipline last. For the first time since the confrontation, the 5 recruits understood that Harper Lane's 30-second display in the mess hall was not just a physical lesson. It was a demonstration of leadership, respect, and situational awareness. They had been tested, humbled, and educated all at once. Harper observed them quietly for a moment, noting subtle shifts in posture and attention. She had taught them without raising her voice, without unnecessary aggression, and without seeking recognition. The lesson had been delivered, silent, precise, and unforgettable. "Tomorrow," she said finally, "we will continue. Observation drills, situational awareness exercises, and reflection. You will not just act. You will think, analyze, and respond. That is the path to becoming effective leaders." The recruits nodded, their faces still tinged with awe and lingering embarrassment. But beneath it all, a spark had been ignited. The spark of understanding, of humility, and of the desire to improve. Harper Lane turned away, walking back toward the training center with the same calm authority she had displayed throughout the entire encounter. The 5 men remained in the courtyard, absorbing the depth of her lesson. They had entered the mess hall with arrogance, laughter, and bravado. They had walked into a 30-second storm that dismantled their assumptions, pride, and confidence. Now, in the open courtyard under the sun, they faced the aftermath, a lesson in respect, awareness, and leadership that would shape their behavior for years to come. And Harper Lane, calm, composed, and unassuming, had done what few could. She had transformed 5 reckless young recruits into students of discipline, awareness, and respect, all in a single afternoon. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the Coronado training grounds as Harper Lane led the 5 recruits into a section of the base that had been reserved for specialized exercises. The air was crisp and sharp, carrying the faint scent of salt water from the nearby Pacific. The recruits followed quietly, their steps hesitant but attentive, their minds still echoing with the mess hall lesson. Carter, still humbled by his earlier confrontation, broke the silence. "So, this is the observation drill?" Harper didn't respond immediately. She surveyed the area, scanning for potential hazards, noting the layout, and mentally preparing the recruits for what they were about to face. Finally she turned, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "This is a test, not of physical strength, but of awareness, patience, and leadership. You will move as a team, observe carefully, and react appropriately. Every detail matters. Fail to notice, fail to act, and there are consequences. Simulated, but instructive." Briggs frowned. "Simulated consequences?" "Yes," Harper said. "You will not be hurt, but your decisions will be evaluated. Timing, observation, coordination, and respect for each other will determine your performance." Lopez whispered under his breath, "Sounds intense?" Harper ignored him. "We begin. Move into the forested section. Observe the markers I've placed. Identify potential threats, points of advantage, and hazards. Communicate clearly and decisively. Do not act impulsively." The recruits glanced at each other, uncertainty mixed with anticipation. They had been humbled, but the fire of determination had been rekindled. This was their chance to redeem themselves, to demonstrate that they had learned from Harper's lessons. Harper observed silently as they entered the trees, noting posture, communication, and attention to detail. "Carter," she called, "lead the formation. Use what you've learned. Plan, anticipate, and guide your team." Carter swallowed hard, stepping forward. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice firm despite lingering nerves. He realized that leadership required more than confidence. It required careful observation and guidance, principles Harper had demonstrated effortlessly. The recruits moved in formation, scanning the terrain. Small markers, colored flags, reflective strips, and minor obstacles had been placed to test their attention and analytical skills. Harper observed from a distance, noting their subtle interactions, communication patterns, and the way they adapted to the environment. Lopez noticed a reflective marker, partially hidden behind a bush. "Carter, marker here," he whispered. Carter nodded, acknowledging the find, and instructed the team to record it in their mental map. "Good," Harper muttered quietly, noting the progress. "They're learning to observe rather than react impulsively." The group continued deeper into the terrain, encountering small surprises, simulated hazards like loose logs, uneven ground, and decoy obstacles designed to test judgment. The recruits communicated effectively, covering each other's blind spots, and slowly began to anticipate the next challenge rather than reacting instinctively. Nolan paused, noticing a subtle shadow movement near a marker. "Wait," he whispered, pointing. "Something's off. Check that area before we move." Carter signaled the team to halt and investigate. Carefully, they approached, discovering a camouflage decoy, a small mannequin representing an ambush scenario. Carter directed the team to evaluate its position, analyze escape routes, and communicate their plan. Harper observed the teamwork silently, a faint nod of approval passing her lips. This was progress. They were applying her lessons: observation, patience, communication, and measured action. Briggs, usually brash and impatient, cautiously noted a series of markers along the tree line. "If we follow these, we can map the terrain efficiently," he suggested. The others nodded, impressed by his insight. Harper made a mental note. The recruits were learning to trust observation and analysis over instinctive bravado. Suddenly, a new challenge emerged, an unexpected set of obstacles designed to force rapid decision-making. Small wooden barricades, low-hanging branches, and uneven ground required immediate adaptation. Carter signaled the team to move carefully, anticipating potential hazards and keeping constant communication. Harper moved silently through the trees, observing every movement, every decision, every micro-expression. She noted Carter's increased confidence, tempered by awareness, Lopez's attentiveness growing sharper, and Briggs' cautious decision-making replacing impulsive action. Even Duffy and Nolan, who had been quiet observers, now contributed meaningfully, offering insights and adjustments. The recruits reached a small clearing, marked with a final flag. Carter paused, taking a deep breath. "Everyone accounted for? Hazards observed?" he asked. The team nodded, completing the exercise without a single major error. Harper stepped into the clearing, her calm presence immediately drawing attention. "Well done," she said, her voice measured but carrying unmistakable authority. "You applied observation, communication, and patience. You did not rush, you did not assume, and you did not act impulsively. That is the first step toward effective leadership." Carter exhaled in relief. We did it?" "Yes," Harper replied. "But remember, success here is temporary. Real-world situations are unpredictable. Composure, awareness, and respect must be constant, not situational. One lapse can undo all progress. This is not about winning a game. This is about survival, leadership, and trust." Briggs finally smiled faintly. I think I understand now. It's not just about acting first. It's about seeing everything before acting." Harper nodded. "Exactly. You are learning to anticipate, to communicate, and to respect the environment and each other. Leadership is not about ego. It is about responsibility for yourself, for your team, and for the situation." Lopez, still catching his breath, added quietly, I didn't expect. I mean, this is different from anything I imagined." Harper's gray eyes met his. "That is the point?" Lessons often come disguised in unexpected ways. You must recognize them, internalize them, and apply them. Otherwise, arrogance will return, and mistakes will be repeated. The recruits exchanged glances, a mixture of exhaustion and pride. They had been tested, humbled, and now guided. The trial had pushed them to observe, think, and act collectively rather than impulsively. Harper's silent mentorship had begun to take root. Carter spoke again, voice firmer now. "Thank you. Ma'am, we get it. We won't forget today." Harper nodded once. "Good. Remember, leadership is continuous. Awareness, respect, and composure are skills that require constant practice. Today was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the challenges will be harder, the lessons more intense. But if you internalize what you've learned, you will continue to grow." The recruits followed Harper back toward the base, quiet but attentive. For the first time, they understood that respect was not demanded through force, that awareness was more valuable than strength, and that leadership required humility as much as courage. Harper walked ahead, calm and composed, her footsteps deliberate. She didn't boast, she didn't lecture. She simply embodied the principles she had demonstrated: control, awareness, and authority. As they returned, the 5 recruits carried more than physical fatigue. They carried lessons, reflection, and the beginning of transformation. 30 seconds in the mess hall had started the process. The observation drill had deepened it. And under Harper Lane's guidance, the journey toward true leadership had only just begun. The final days of training under Harper Lane's watchful eye arrived with a quiet intensity. The 5 recruits, Carter, Briggs, Lopez, Nolan, and Duffy, had transformed from reckless, overconfident young men into disciplined, observant, and respectful trainees. Each morning began with meticulous exercises in situational awareness, team coordination, and leadership drills. Harper's lessons were subtle but powerful. Every movement, glance, and decision was a test in observation, patience, and judgment. Carter, once brash and cocky, now led the group with measured confidence. He carefully scanned the terrain, noting obstacles, potential hazards, and the subtle cues in his teammates' body language. Every decision was deliberate. When a misstep occurred, he corrected calmly, guiding his team without anger or arrogance. He had learned what Harper had taught. Leadership was responsibility, not ego. Briggs, who had previously relied on brute force and impulsive action, had become the team's strategist. He identified patterns, mapped terrain, and suggested tactical adjustments, his voice confident but respectful. For the first time, he understood that true strength lay not in dominating others, but in enabling their potential. His earlier recklessness had been replaced with insight. Lopez, once timid and hesitant, had grown into a keen observer. He noticed details others overlooked: a subtle shift in weight, the faint rustle of leaves, or the glint of a marker in the sun. Harper had taught him that observation was a skill, honed by patience and awareness. Now, Lopez's attentiveness became a vital part of the group's success. Nolan and Duffy, quieter and reflective, had learned to speak up at critical moments. Harper emphasized that silence was not weakness, and that listening before acting was a sign of intelligence and respect. Both men contributed thoughtfully, offering insights at precise moments, guiding the team with subtle but essential input. The culmination of their training came on a day designated by Harper as the field trial. The recruits were tasked with navigating a complex course filled with obstacles, decoy hazards, and hidden markers. The course required them to apply everything Harper had taught: observation, teamwork, communication, and leadership. Mistakes would be visible, but consequences were designed to teach, not punish. Harper observed from a distance, her eyes scanning the team with the precision of a seasoned operative. She noted Carter leading steadily, Briggs analyzing and adjusting, Lopez alert and meticulous, and Nolan and Duffy offering timely insights. The group moved fluidly, communicating efficiently, covering blind spots, and adapting seamlessly to unexpected challenges. At one point, a sudden diversion appeared. A small pile of logs collapsed, creating an obstacle directly in their path. Carter immediately assessed the situation, signaling his team to halt. Briggs suggested a safe alternate route. Lopez identified potential hazards along the way, and Nolan and Duffy helped coordinate movements. The team navigated the diversion flawlessly, their actions deliberate and synchronized. Harper's expression remained calm but approving. As the team approached the final segment of the course, Harper introduced the last challenge, a simulated ambush scenario. Mannequins disguised as hostile figures had been positioned to test rapid decision-making under pressure. The recruits quickly assessed the situation, identified safe paths, and communicated strategies. Carter directed the group with composure, ensuring everyone's safety while maintaining forward momentum. Every action was intentional, calculated, and disciplined. When they reached the final marker, Harper approached quietly, her presence commanding attention without a word. She observed the recruits' posture, breathing, and expressions, noting their growth from the mess hall confrontation that had begun their journey. "You have completed the field trial," she said calmly, her voice firm but not harsh. "Notice how you acted differently than before. Confidence tempered by awareness. Action guided by observation. Communication grounded in respect. Leadership earned, not demanded. This is what you have learned." Carter exhaled, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. We did it, ma'am. We actually did it." "Yes," Harper said, nodding. "But remember, success is not measured by completion alone. It is measured by the understanding you carry forward, the respect you maintain, and the decisions you make when no one is watching. Leadership is continuous. You have shown growth, but growth never ends." Briggs smiled faintly. "I can see it now. I get why we failed before. It wasn't just skill. It was awareness, patience, respect." Harper's eyes softened slightly. "Exactly. Physical strength can only take you so far. Awareness, discipline, and respect carry you further and last longer. These are the qualities that define true leaders." Lopez, his voice quieter but steady, said, I think I understand. We've learned more than drills and exercises. We've learned to see, to listen, to think before acting. You've learned to respect each other and yourself," Harper added. "Leadership is not about ego. It is about responsibility. Every action, every decision, every glance has consequences. Carry that understanding into everything you do." Nolan and Duffy nodded, their expressions reflecting both relief and newfound determination. They had faced humility, embarrassment, and challenge, and emerged wiser, stronger, and more aware. Commander Reeves, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Commander Lane," he said, "you have completed your mentorship of these recruits. The transformation is remarkable. They have internalized lessons few grasp in months of training." Harper nodded once. "They have applied the principles effectively. Their growth is evident, but they must continue practicing awareness, respect, and leadership in every task they undertake. The foundation is laid, but mastery requires consistency." Carter looked at Harper, gratitude and respect in his eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. For everything, we wouldn't have learned this without you." Harper's gray eyes met his steadily. "The lesson was always within you. I merely guided it into focus. Remember, leadership is learned, practiced, and lived. Carry this forward, and you will not just survive, you will lead." The recruits stood taller now, a quiet confidence replacing arrogance. They had been humbled, tested, and guided. Their transformation was complete, not by brute force, not by intimidation, but by discipline, awareness, and respect. Harper Lane had shown them the path, and they had chosen to follow. As the recruits walked back toward the main training compound, Harper watched silently, her presence calm and unassuming. In 30 seconds, she had humbled them. In days of guidance, she had transformed them. And now they walked as a team, confident, aware, and ready to lead with the lessons of respect and discipline firmly embedded in their minds. The story of the quiet woman who commanded respect without shouting, who dismantled arrogance in 30 seconds and built leaders in days, spread quietly through the base. Harper Lane had done more than train 5 recruits. She had shaped their understanding of leadership, the importance of observation, and the power of humility. And the 5 recruits, once reckless and overconfident, now carried forward a lesson that would remain with them for a lifetime. That true strength is measured not in dominance, but in awareness, patience, and respect. Leadership is earned, not assumed. And Harper Lane, Navy SEAL, Lieutenant Commander, and mentor, had ensured they would never forget it. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the training grounds. The 5 recruits walked together, united not by ego, but by shared understanding and respect. Harper Lane remained a quiet figure behind them, observing, guiding, and setting the standard for what true leadership looked like. And in that moment, the journey from reckless recruits to disciplined leaders was complete.